You Know What You Should Do by Jessica Lee Morgan. Drugs and booze. Alcohol plays a huge part in the music industry. So do illicit substances, and of course, tea and cigarettes. So many songs are inspired by all of the above, people's struggles with them, the highs and the lows. Recording and tour stories revolve around them. Albums and songs are named after them, and no doubt they oil the wheels of the music industry more than, say, common sense, meditation and exercise. My mother never drank much, but she had a tolerant approach to alcohol when we were children. Following her own childhood tradition, we always had a bottle of Babycham in our Christmas stockings from about the age of 7. Being a precocious child, when I went to visit the grandparents in America, I said they needed to keep a bottle of Bailey's for me in their Brooklyn flat and in their new mobile home in Pennsylvania. My mother's open-minded approach meant that there was no exciting taboo around alcohol, and once I grew up, I never went totally overboard. Well, not all the time anyway. My father, on the other hand, realised about 30 years ago that he was an alcoholic and took action. He also dabbled in a lot of drugs too. I wished he had realised these things were an issue earlier on in my life, but there it is. People have to be ready to give up. I started my public drinking when I was 15 in the pubs of Reading and Henley. Mary only allowed this because I was escorted by 2 trusted friends, John and Martin, who looked after me. Well, it was fun, and my taste in alcohol has since developed from Diamond White. Now it's real ale or cider, wine only with food, and the occasional tequila or scotch. Later on, I started frequenting the Vic in Henley. It was full of rocker biker types, and also policemen from the station opposite. Again, I was safe with these guys. I dabbled in a bit of this and a bit of that, but nothing ever went up my nose or in my arm. I worked in 2 pubs in Henley, the Argyle and the 3 Tons. They were fun times. I realised that the pubs supplied a social care structure for all the old boys who would frequent us. Then at university, there was more booze, of course, and utter freedom. The Union and the city centre were within staggering distance of my halls. I met Chris very early on, and he was part of CAMRA, the campaign for real ale. After he set up the Live Music Society, in which I subsequently played a big part, he set up the Real Ale Society for students. Our first night out, he gave me extra beer tokens because I think he liked me, and 5 pints of Old Peculiar later, my bedroom was spinning around me. The nadir was when we had Drink the Bar Dry at the end of term. This was a regular event, drinking all the remaining booze at £1 a go. I was on Red Bull and vodka for some reason. I had far too many. My friends carried me down the front steps of the Union, 2 floors worth, and dropped me on the pavement. An ambulance worker kept asking what I was on, and my friends just laughed and said, "Booze." Anyway, I was carried off to safety. I didn't learn my lesson, and have had many terrible hangovers since. The last was on an all-inclusive holiday with Chris and his mum, Anne. We stayed up talking to an ex-sailor. Too much rum. Comatose the next day. I think I've mentioned my Tokyo experience when I got Wilcoxed. Wine is a particularly bad thing for me to get drunk on. The next morning I had a very bleary breakfast with Tony, who I don't think noticed the state I was in, and then I went back to bed for the day. I made it onto the minibus that afternoon to the venue, lay on the floor a lot, and did both sets perfectly well. There was no question of not doing them. That's the career finished. Tony didn't respect me for the hangover, but I hope I was redeemed for doing the shows. After the shows that night, I took it easy. 3 other bandmates went on the rampage and had very sore heads the next day. However, James Stevenson had a new admiration for me. It's a very strange thing that being able to pickle yourself and nearly kill yourself on purpose gives you some kind of legendary status. The rock and roll stories of excess make it exciting. Maybe it's because show business in general represents behaviour that all of its audience wants to indulge in, but can't or won't. It's as if some people have to take it so far so that other people don't have to. As Robin Hitchcock says, we get up and make fools of ourselves on stage so that the audience doesn't have to. Robin taught us the term lady petrol, as he is partial to a spot of rosé after gigs. I've known musicians who desperately embrace the image of excess because they think it looks cool. It's part of their image. On the other hand, I'm sure that many of the legendary alcoholics did it because they struggled with the lifestyle. The feeling of being on stage, especially if you're in a big, loud, sexy rock band, is a massive high. When I've been on stage with Holy Bowie, I feel at my peak immensely powerful. You've got a huge crowd of people in front of you in ecstasy because of what you're doing. You flip a hip or strike a pose and they go nuts. They want to be you, be with you. Then you get off stage and you're back in the dressing room, which is dingy, then back on a bus if you're lucky, and then at the end of the tour you're back in your own kitchen doing your laundry and making your own dinner. It's no surprise that some people want to prolong that buzz. After a show you have to unwind, disperse all that energy, and many do it with drugs and booze. Actually, Holy Bowie were pretty tame. Some of us were pensioners. Woody drank little and Tony nothing. Sometimes Paul would abstain for a tour just to see if he could. Glenn introduced us all to Jägermeister, for the voice of course. Normally I wouldn't touch it. It tastes of Hactos, the chloroform cough medicine from Llanelli we had as kids. When we came off at the end of the show, before the encores, the tour manager would have a row of beers and maybe Jaeger for us. We'd open them and take one back on for the encores. Well, I mean, it's a 2-hour show. In certain cities in the USA, the entire audience would be smoking weed. At the end of those shows, we'd all be back on the bus snarfing down all the crisps we could find. None of us had smoked it ourselves, we didn't need to. We've made a thing in our online shows about the Jaeger, and consequently we were gifted bottles of the stuff. I have to point out that at home, a Scotch is preferred. Seeing Queen on stage, in videos now of course, you'll notice that on Freddie's piano there are 5 cups of beer and 5 cups of water. It's isotonic. He probably sweated most of it out. When you play a proper show, there should be a rider, in this case a spread of food and drinks of all sorts. There will be requests for various alcoholic drinks. Certain members of the band will nab the whole bottle of something and claim it for themselves. So when it comes to the after-show chill-out back at the hotel, you'll notice that, for instance, you can't just have 1 glass of red wine because all the red wine will have been claimed. So once you know this, make your particular request. Some of the crew will want their drink after the show. They won't have been able to drink before or during as the band can. Every band has its own rules. If you drink during the show, keep it discreet. These days, it doesn't look good. One band I was in, the lead guy thought it added to the aesthetic to have a glass of red wine on stage. The agent was furious. There he was glugging red wine during one of my songs. It didn't translate well. And for God's sake, don't ever be drunk on stage. It's unprofessional. Act drunk by all means. Keep it in your control, but to be drunk on stage doesn't work. There are plenty of things to trip over on stage. You will not look cool. Mental health. Once mental illness was a great PR stunt. Now everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. While it's unquestionably laudable to be open about the trials and tribulations of life in the limelight, it needs to be approached with caution. Popular musicians struggle and their mental breakdown is milked in the press for all it's worth, leaving them absolutely wrecked. No help is given by their record company because it's not in their interests. Madness sells. The only thing to do is to write songs about your misery and turn them into hits. Make your own money from your own madness, and then claim it's about someone else. It's bloody hard being a musician. You have to feel that you're worth it, but most of the time you feel like an imposter. You have to take criticism, or even worse, indifference, in response to the blood, sweat and tears that you pour into your music. God knows why we put up with it, but something in us just cries to be let out, and we are slaves to it. I am not my mental health, as I once wrote in my song, I am not. I will hazard a guess that most creative types struggle with mental illness in one form or another. It's why we do it. Why on earth would we pour our heart and soul into our work only to have it judged, or worse, totally ignored? It's a cliché, but artists create their best work when they're suffering. How many songs about heartbreak are there? How did Van Gogh produce such fabulous but tortured images? I worked, as I've said, for the PRS Benevolent Fund, visiting what I crassly termed decomposing composers. A dose of gallows humour, but I needed it to survive the visits to people who had fallen on hard times. Some immensely talented people's careers were cut short through illness, crisis, or physical disability. I identified with many of them. I was able to tell them that they may feel like shit now, but eventually it will pass, and much of the time it did. Other times, it did not. One lad with whom I tried to arrange a visit wasn't answering his phone. Tragically, he'd already put an end to his suffering. It was a tough job. We put together a working group for mental health. We debated whether we could strongly encourage people to seek help. Those who seemed to be languishing in depression, not allowing visits or our attempts to help, seemed to be hopeless. By simply funding them, we wondered if we were in fact prolonging and enabling the situation. You can't force people to recover or to seek help. If you're offering it, you can't make financial support dependent on their actions, because they'll just cut themselves off. Thankfully, there is now a dedicated service called Music Minds Matter, a partnership between PRS Benevolent Fund and Help Musicians UK. musicmindsmatter.org.uk. I can't count how many times I've given up on music, and almost given up on life too. As a seasoned depressive, I'm well practiced now. I know that a lot had to do with hormones and a lot to do with expectations. I'd tried and tried to get success, offering myself to labels, publishers, managers, fans, promoters, in an attempt to get myself out there, but no one wanted me. I realised it was like a dating game. The more desperate you seem, the less people want you. The advice is to follow your own heart in music and other creative exploits. Do what you love, be true to yourself, be genuine, authentic, all that, and you'll win in the end. But what if you don't? It's a regular cycle of hope, aspiration, rejection, disappointment, from one gig to the next. It was frustrating to read all the advice for depression. Make a self-care box containing pyjamas, bath oil, a DVD and a scented candle, they'd say, as if you could just smell yourself better. When you feel like a turd at the bottom of a well, no amount of bubble baths can get you out. You just have to say, go on then, take me, finish me, kill me now. If you're lucky enough to have a safety valve, like I seem to do, then eventually you'll get so sick of yourself that one day you find yourself getting out of bed and doing something, as if all that never happened. I used online depression forums with the username Mashed Bananas, because Chris, also familiar with anxiety-based depression, used to joke that he'd pad me up and feed me mashed fruit. I don't wish to invalidate anyone's experience, but it seemed that many people completely owned their depression, their meds, their anxiety, their disability. Any suggestions for what might help were scorned, and they'd say, no, that won't work. It's a brilliant excuse for not doing anything. The black dog won't let me. It becomes an identity, a personality, and we can wallow in it. It's the most self-centered, self-absorbed state of being. You can let the house fall down around you and take everyone you love with it, and you just won't care. I was lucky that Chris never gave up on me. The black dog seems to have visited all my family, but we're all creatives. To be creative, you have to be open to emotions and observations, which you then pour into your work. I was raised to believe I could do anything, which is totally laudable. I can dabble in most things. I have 2 unrelated degrees, English Lit, BA, and Social Science, MSc, and a series of jobs in the health and social care world, in an attempt to get some normal structure into my life, but the music always called me like an unhealthy love affair. I've been told so many times that I'm so talented, ooh, don't I have a lovely voice, ooh, aren't your songs brill, and yet, where's my major record deal and my world tours? Some fans have been very personal in their approaches to us, and some have overstepped the line, trying to make us responsible for their mental health. It's been challenging to set the boundaries. Well, I wrote a great song about one of them. I introduced it on stage saying that if you're depressed, seek help from professionals, not from songwriters who are just as fucked up as you are, because all we'll do is write a song about you. Of course, this person wanted a relationship with people they'd idolised. They wanted us to validate them. You can't have that. If you're that unhappy, no one can validate you. You have to validate yourself. On the flip side, I've seen several musicians start a crowdfunder, not for their next album, but for their medical expenses for mental illness. They seem to have been more successful with this than with their music. I completely understand that desperation leads to this kind of thing, but once it's out, you can't put it back in. I saw one artist use their panic disorder to recruit help for their art. It may work, but it's a very negative way of getting publicity. I've seen mental breakdowns being cited in press releases. Well, we've all been there, and we all express our misery in our songs, but I have a big problem with using it as publicity. It devalues what you're all going through, and you're forever labelled nut job. I've posted on social media about my mental issues, but in a way that I hope encourages other people to get help, not as a means of self-promotion. So basically, if you're screwed up, seek professional help. Use antidepressants if prescribed. Get counselling. Don't wear out your friends and family. Don't lay it on people you don't know. We all try to be compassionate, but we all have limits and our own struggles to deal with. My black dog will always come sniffing round, and sometimes he sits on my head for a while. But his visits have become shorter, lasting hours instead of months. And when he's left, I can usually rustle up some new song lyrics.